It was the summer of my 65th year, and my granddaughter Jennifer was getting married. I'd always believed family celebrations were sacred, moments to weave love and memory into something eternal. I wanted this day to be perfect, a balm for the grief that lingered since my husband, Thomas, was taken by cancer 3 years prior. That morning, I stood before my mirror, smoothing the pale blue dress Thomas had loved. My silver hair was pinned with care, each curl a quiet act of defiance against time. I dabbed on the perfume he'd given me for our last anniversary, a scent of jasmine and memory that still carried his warmth. "You look beautiful, Elizabeth," I whispered to my reflection, imagining his voice echoing back, his hand brushing mine. The ceremony at St. Mark's Church was a vision. Jennifer floated down the aisle, her face radiant with joy, a star in a sea of white lace. My son Richard, her father, beamed with pride, his arms steady as he escorted her. Even my daughter-in-law, Pamela, seemed softened, her eyes glistening with rare emotion. For those fleeting hours, the world felt whole again, as if Thomas were watching from some unseen place, smiling. But the reception, that's where the shadows began to creep in, where the illusion of family unity started to crack. I arrived at the Westbrook Hotel's grand ballroom, my heart light despite the weight I carried. The room sparkled with crystal chandeliers, the air alive with laughter and music. At the check-in table, a young woman with a bright smile handed me my name tag. "Here you are, Mrs. Thompson," she said cheerfully. I glanced down, expecting to see Elizabeth Thompson, grandmother of the bride. Instead, in elegant, mocking calligraphy, it read, "The old lady who's paying for everything." My breath caught. My hand froze mid-air. The words burned into my mind, sharp as a blade, each letter a deliberate wound. Surely this was a mistake, a cruel prank gone wrong. "Is something wrong?" the young woman asked, her smile faltering as she noticed my expression. I forced a laugh, my cheeks flushing with heat. "Just a mix-up," I said, pinning the tag to my dress, the pin pricking my finger as if to underscore the sting. I wouldn't let this tarnish Jennifer's day. But as I stepped into the ballroom, the words clung to me like a curse, whispering doubts I'd long suppressed. The old lady who's paying for everything. Who had written this? Jennifer. Radiant and kind, Richard, my only son. Pamela, with her polished smiles. Who thought this was funny? Throughout the cocktail hour, I moved through the crowd, smiling, chatting, ignoring the glances at my name tag, some curious, some amused, most too polite to comment. But the weight of it grew heavier, pressing against my chest, a silent accusation. Then, I overheard a conversation that turned my blood to ice, each word a shard of betrayal. "Did you see the grandmother's name tag?" a guest whispered, stifling a laugh behind a champagne flute. Pamela said it was their little joke. Apparently, she's their personal ATM. ATM. The word hit like a slap, raw and stinging, stripping away the warmth of the evening. I slipped away, my hands trembling, seeking a quiet corner to steady myself. But Richard spotted me across the room, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Mom," he called, waving me over with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Come meet the Andersons. Dad used to golf with Bill." I approached, the name tag feeling like a brand seared into my chest. "Mom, our walking bank account," Richard said with a chuckle, gesturing to the tag as if it were a badge of honor. The Andersons' smiles faltered, their eyes darting to the offending words, then back to me, uncertain. "Elizabeth Thompson," I corrected, extending my hand with a firmness I didn't feel. Thomas's widow. Bill Anderson nodded, his voice kind but tinged with discomfort. Thomas spoke of you often. He was so proud of you. His words were a lifeline, a reminder of the man who'd loved me fiercely, who'd built a life with me from nothing. But Richard's casual cruelty lingered, a poison seeping into the night, tainting every smile, every toast. Later, I pulled Richard aside, my voice low but sharp, barely containing the hurt. "What's the meaning of this?" I asked, pointing to the tag, my finger trembling. He rolled his eyes, as if I were a child overreacting to a harmless jest. "Oh, Mom, it's just a joke. Everyone knows you're the one with the deep pockets since Dad left you everything." "It's humiliating," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the word heavy with years of unspoken pain. "Oh, please," he scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Lighten up! It's a party!" Pamela appeared, her mother of the bride dress shimmering like a false promise under the chandeliers. "There you are, Elizabeth," she said, her smile too bright, too practiced. "We want everyone to know who's responsible for this gorgeous wedding." She winked, and they both laughed, as if I were in on their jest, as if my humiliation were part of the celebration. I excused myself to the restroom, my composure cracking like thin ice underfoot. As I dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, fighting to hold back tears, a voice called from outside the door, tentative but familiar. "Mrs. Thompson? Elizabeth? It's Martin Reynolds, Thomas's attorney." Martin, a kind man with graying temples and a steady presence, had handled Thomas's estate with care and discretion. He stood just outside, his expression dark as he gestured vaguely toward my name tag. "That's not funny," he said, his voice low and serious, laced with a protective anger I hadn't expected. "And Thomas would be furious." He hesitated, then reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, its edges worn but sealed, as if it had been waiting for this moment. "There's something you should know," he said, his eyes searching mine. "A codicil to Thomas's will, added shortly before he passed." My fingers trembled as I opened it, the paper crackling in the silence. The legal language was dense, a labyrinth of clauses, but its meaning cut through like a blade. Any descendant who publicly humiliated me would forfeit their share of Thomas's fortune, a fortune far larger than I'd ever imagined, hidden in the quiet brilliance of his investments. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked, my voice shaking, torn between awe and betrayal. Martin's eyes softened, his voice gentle but firm. "He hoped it would never be needed. He wanted them to treat you with love, not fear losing their inheritance. He believed in you, Elizabeth, more than you might realize." I folded the document, slipping it into my purse, its weight both a burden and a shield. The name tag, the whispers, Richard's laughter. It wasn't just a joke. It was a betrayal, laid bare in elegant calligraphy, a truth I could no longer ignore. But I wasn't ready to act, not yet. "Let's see how far they'll go," I told Martin, a spark of determination igniting deep within me, a flame that had been dormant too long. The morning after the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, the name tag placed before me like a relic of betrayal, its calligraphy a silent accusation, the old lady who's paying for everything. I traced the letters with my fingertip, each curve a reminder of the family I'd loved, the family I had trusted. I heard Thomas's voice in my mind, his rare, formidable temper flaring when someone disrespected those he loved. "They've changed," I whispered to the empty room, as if he could hear me across the divide. Or maybe I was blind all along. I wandered to the living room, drawn to the family portrait above the fireplace, taken 5 years ago on our 40th anniversary. Thomas sat at the center, his strength undimmed despite the illness creeping in, his eyes warm with pride. I stood beside him, my hand on his shoulder, a quiet anchor. Richard and Pamela flanked us, their smiles polished but hollow, even then. Jennifer and her brother Michael, then teenagers, stood in front, their faces bright with promise, untainted by the greed that would later surface. When had it all shifted? When had love turned to entitlement, respect to calculation? The first clear memory came 6 months after Thomas's funeral. Richard and Pamela invited me to dinner, a rare gesture that had warmed my grieving heart. They were unusually attentive, refilling my wine, reminiscing about Thomas with a tenderness that felt rehearsed. Over dessert, Richard cleared his throat, his eyes avoiding mine. Mom, we're thinking about remodeling the kitchen. Nothing fancy, just new appliances, countertops. That sounds lovely, I'd said, oblivious to the undercurrent. The thing is, Pamela added smoothly, her smile practiced, with the kids' college tuition, we're a bit stretched. Are you asking for money? I'd asked, surprised but not yet wary. Not asking, Richard said quickly, his tone too casual. It's just, Dad left you quite comfortable. I wrote them a $30,000 check that evening, my heart warmed by the thought of helping family, of keeping us close in Thomas's absence. Looking back, that was the beginning, a crack in the foundation I hadn't seen. Mullen requests grew larger, bolder. A kitchen remodel became a full home renovation, complete with marble floors and custom cabinets. Tuition aid for Jennifer and Michael turned into luxury cars when they turned 18, a convertible for her, a sleek SUV for him, family vacations to the Bahamas, to Aspen, to Paris, where I was invited to join and expected to fund every flight, every meal, every extravagant whim. I opened the hallway closet, pulling out a box of financial records, the weight of it heavier than I had expected. Sitting on the floor like a schoolgirl, I sifted through bank statements and canceled checks, each one a piece of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. The evidence was staggering. Over 3 years, I'd given Richard and Pamela nearly $250,000, each check a thread in a web of entitlement I hadn't seen until now. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Pamela's voice poured through, syrupy and familiar, a tone I'd come to recognize as a prelude to a request. Elizabeth, the wedding was beautiful, wasn't it? Jennifer and Mark are so grateful for your generosity. I closed my eyes, remembering the $45,000 check I'd written for the venue and catering, a sum they'd accepted without a word of thanks. It was lovely, I said, my voice neutral. Actually, she continued, her tone shifting to that practiced sweetness. Mark's parents were supposed to pay for the honeymoon, but his father's business is struggling. Jennifer's devastated. They've got their hearts set on 2 weeks in Bali. I paused, the codicil flashing in my mind, its words a quiet power. I'll think about it, I said, surprising us both with my restraint. There was a beat of silence, a crack in her composure. They need to book soon for the best rates, she pressed, her voice tightening. I'll let you know tomorrow, I replied, hanging up before she could argue, the click of the phone a small act of defiance. A knock at the door startled me, pulling me from the weight of my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Michael, my grandson, shifting nervously on the porch, his tall frame and kind eyes so like Thomas's. I stashed the financial papers back in the closet and opened the door. He hugged me tightly, his embrace warm but heavy with concern. Grandma, I wanted to apologize, he said, stepping inside as I gestured to the kitchen. The name tag, the way everyone was talking at the wedding, it wasn't right. You noticed? I asked, a lump forming in my throat as I put on the kettle for tea. Of course, he said, sitting at the table, his voice steady but pained. So did others. It was humiliating. I nodded, pouring hot water over tea bags, the steam curling like a memory. Thank you, Michael. He hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. Mom and Dad, they've changed since Grandpa died. Or maybe I just didn't see it before. All they talk about is your money, your house, your savings, what they think they're entitled to. What do you mean? I pressed, setting a cup before him, the tea's warmth a contrast to the chill of his words. He looked down, embarrassed. Last week, I overheard them discussing your house. Dad said it's too big for one person, that they could help you downsize. They mentioned Sunrise Acres, the retirement home, said it would be better for everyone. The words hit like a blow, sharp and cold. My house, my sanctuary, filled with Thomas's laughter, our shared dreams, the garden where we'd planned our future, was just another asset to them, a prize to be claimed. I thought of the codicil, its power lying dormant in Martin's envelope, a secret weapon Thomas had left me. Grandma, Michael said, his voice steady, his eyes meeting mine. It's time for some changes. I smiled, a plan forming in the quiet spaces of my mind, a seed of strength taking root. You're right, sweetheart. It's time. 3 days later, Richard and Pamela hosted a post-wedding brunch at the Oak Ridge Country Club, a place of manicured lawns and polished pretense. I debated attending, my heart warring between duty and suspicion, but curiosity won out. I needed to know if the name tag was a cruel whim or part of a deeper, more insidious pattern. Dressed in a cream pantsuit Thomas once called regal, I walked into the private dining room, my heart steady, but my senses sharp, attuned to every glance, every whisper. Pamela greeted me with an air kiss, her designer dress a glaring symbol of excess, its cost likely more than most people's monthly rent. Elizabeth, you look nice, she said, her tone tinged with surprise, as if my effort to look elegant was unexpected. They seated me next to Mark's parents, strangers I barely knew, rather than near my grandchildren, a subtle but deliberate slight. The brunch hummed along, a veneer of civility masking the tension that pulsed beneath. The clink of silverware, the murmur of small talk. It all felt like a stage play, and I was beginning to see my role. Then Pamela clinked her glass, drawing all eyes, her smile bright but not quite reaching her eyes. We want to thank everyone for making Jennifer and Mark's wedding so special, she began, her voice smooth as silk. And a special thank you to Grandma Elizabeth, who's been so incredibly generous. She paused, her gaze locking onto mine, a challenge hidden in her smile. In fact, we're thrilled to announce that Grandma will be funding Jennifer and Mark's dream honeymoon to Bali. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips, the porcelain trembling in my hand. I'd made no such promise. All eyes turned to me, the room holding its breath, waiting for my response. This is the first I'm hearing of it, I said, my voice calm but edged with steel, each word deliberate. Jennifer looked confused, then embarrassed, her cheeks flushing. Mark stared at his plate, his discomfort palpable. Pamela laughed, the sound brittle, like glass about to shatter. We discussed it yesterday, remember? She said, her tone insistent. You said you'd think about it. I did say that, I corrected, my eyes meeting hers, unflinching. And I'm still thinking. Richard leaned in, his whisper loud enough for the table to hear, a stage whisper meant to shame. Mom, Don't make a scene. We've already told them they can book the trip. Something inside me snapped. A thread stretched too far for too long. A dam breaking under the weight of years of compliance. I don't recall agreeing to pay for Bali, I said, my voice carrying across the table, clear and unwavering. In fact, I believe Mark's parents were originally planning to cover this expense. Mark's father shifted uncomfortably, muttering about business setbacks, his voice barely audible. I understand, I said kindly, turning to him with a warmth I genuinely felt. These things happen, but it's inappropriate to volunteer someone else's money publicly, don't you think? Pamela's face flushed red, her composure cracking. Everyone knows Thomas left you more than comfortable, she hissed, her voice low but venomous, the word comfortable dripping with resentment. My financial situation is not up for public discussion, I said firmly, my gaze sweeping the table. Nor are my spending choices. Richard grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully, his face a mask of anger. Mom, stop it. You're embarrassing us. I pulled free, standing tall, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. No, Richard, I said, my voice steady. You've embarrassed yourselves. I smoothed my jacket, turning to Jennifer and Mark, their faces a mix of shock and shame. Jennifer, Mark, I wish you both every happiness. I'd be happy to contribute to a reasonable honeymoon, privately. Michael stood, his presence steady, his eyes warm with pride. I'll walk you out, Grandma. In the lobby, my hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys, the weight of the moment settling over me. That took courage, Michael said softly, his voice a quiet anchor. I smiled, my heart aching but resolute. Dinner tonight? I'd like that, he said, and in his eyes, I saw Thomas, kind, steadfast, true, a reminder of the man who'd believed in me. That evening, over a simple meal of roast chicken in my kitchen, the scent of rosemary and warmth filling the air, I confided in Michael. I told him about his parents' behavior, the constant demands, the gradual erosion of respect, the plan to downsize me into Sunrise Acres, a retirement home that would strip me of my home, my memories. They want your house, he admitted, his voice heavy with regret, his eyes avoiding mine. Dad said it's a hot market, that they could maximize your investment. They think it's too big for one person. I felt sick, the words a betrayal deeper than I'd imagined. My home, my sanctuary, where Thomas and I had laughed, dreamed, planned our future, where his presence still lingered in the creak of the floorboards, the roses in the garden, was just another asset to them, a prize to be claimed. I was about to tell Michael about the codicil, the secret weapon Thomas had left me, when the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Through the window, I saw Richard's car in the driveway, its headlights cutting through the dusk. It's your father, I said, my heart sinking but my resolve hardening. Michael's expression hardened, his jaw tight. You don't have to answer. But I was done hiding, done shrinking to keep the peace. No, I said, standing. It's time we cleared the air, Sut. I opened the door to find Richard, his face flushed with anger, his eyes blazing. What the hell was that performance at brunch? He demanded, pushing past me into the hallway, his presence filling the space like a storm. He spotted Michael, his expression darkening further. What are you doing here? Having dinner with Grandma, Michael replied calmly, his voice steady, his stance protective. Something you might try without asking for money. Richard's eyes narrowed, his face a mask of fury. Stay out of this, Michael. This is between your mother and me. No, I said firmly, stepping forward, my voice cutting through the tension. Michael stays. I'm tired of your private manipulations, Richard. Let's put everything on the table. He paced my living room like a caged animal, his steps heavy, his voice rising. You're poisoning Michael's mind against us, turning him into your little ally. No, Michael said, stepping forward, his voice calm but unyielding. You've done that yourselves. The name tag at the wedding, volunteering Grandma to pay for the honeymoon without asking, talking about selling her house behind her back. It's not right. Richard's tone shifted, conciliatory but false, a tactic I'd seen too many times. Mom, we're just trying to help you manage your finances. You're not getting any younger. I'm 65, not 95, I snapped, my voice sharp with a strength I hadn't known I possessed. My mind is sharp, and Thomas's estate is not a family piggy bank. His smile vanished, replaced by a cold calculation. So you're cutting us off because of one stupid joke. I'm making my own decisions, I said, my voice so steady, each word a declaration. If Jennifer and Mark want a honeymoon in Bali, they can save for it like most young couples. If you and Pamela want a bigger house, work for it. Richard's face contorted, his anger spilling over. This isn't over, Mom. Not by a long shot. He stormed out, the door slamming behind him, the sound echoing like a final note in a discordant symphony. Michael hugged me tightly, his embrace a lifeline. I'm sorry I didn't stand up sooner, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're standing up now, I said, my heart swelling with pride and love. That's what matters. The next morning, I called Martin Reynolds, my hands steady despite the storm of the previous night. Over coffee in his oak-paneled office, the scent of leather and old books grounding me, he revealed the full scope of Thomas's estate. Millions, carefully invested, far beyond what I'd known. He built several companies, Martin explained, his voice warm with admiration, and sold them at the perfect moments. His investments were conservative, weathering every economic storm. I was stunned, my breath catching. I knew we were comfortable, but this— Thomas was private about money, Martin said, smiling softly. He always said you married him when he had nothing but a beat-up Chevy and dreams. He wanted you to remain the woman who loved him for him, not for wealth. I laughed softly, hearing Thomas's voice in those words, his dry humor and steadfast love. The codicil, Martin confirmed, was ironclad. Public humiliation meant disinheritance. The name tag, the brunch announcement, they qualified. Undeniable in their cruelty. What if I want to make changes? I asked, my mind racing with possibilities. To my will, my assets, how I live. Martin leaned forward, his eyes bright with interest. What do you have in mind? I left his office with a plan, not confrontation, but quiet empowerment, a reclaiming of the life I'd let slip away. I called my old friend Eleanor, arranging lunch to reconnect after years apart, her laughter a balm to my soul. I enrolled in painting classes at the community center, rekindling a passion Thomas had always encouraged, the brush in my hand a tool of rediscovery. I researched small business loans for Michael, who dreamed of opening a bookstore, a dream I believed in as fiercely as he did. When Pamela called, her voice dripping with false concern, I let it go to voicemail. Elizabeth, we need to clear the air, she said, her tone syrupy. Richard told me about last night. Jennifer needs to book the honeymoon soon. I deleted the message, writing a modest check for Jennifer and Mark instead. Enough for a New England getaway, not Bali. I sealed it in a card with a warm note, wishing them happiness, my first step in setting boundaries, in choosing myself. 6 months passed in a blur of transformation, each day a brushstroke on the canvas of my new life. I painted landscapes that sold at the community art fair, the vibrant colors a reflection of the joy I'd rediscovered. I laughed with Eleanor over coffee, our conversations weaving past and present into something new. Michael visited often, sharing his bookstore plans, his enthusiasm infectious. Richard and Pamela oscillated between cold silence and desperate overtures, their requests growing bolder. A renovation, a house for Jennifer, their retirement. Each time, I smiled and said, I'm managing my finances, my voice growing more confident with each repetition. Their frustration grew, their masks slipping, but so did my strength, a quiet power I hadn't known I possessed. My 66th birthday arrived, a milestone I hadn't expected to face with such clarity. Michael insisted on a family gathering at my home, his voice firm with purpose. It's time they remember whose house this is, he said, his resolve echoing Thomas's, a reminder of the man who'd believed in us both. I spent the morning in my garden, deadheading roses I had neglected while catering to Richard and Pamela's demands. The petals fell like old promises, making way for new blooms. By afternoon, my home was ready, filled with the scent of fresh flowers and the warmth of anticipation. I wore a bold red dress, a declaration of my new self, vibrant and unapologetic. Richard and Pamela arrived, their smiles artificial, their eyes scanning my home with a calculating glint. Jennifer and Mark followed, their presence softer, tinged with uncertainty. Martin and old friends of Thomas's completed the guest list, their familiar faces a comfort. Pamela noticed my new painting, a vibrant landscape hanging in the dining room. Did you redecorate? She asked, her tone uneasy, as if my changes unsettled her carefully constructed narrative. Just updates, I said, my voice light but firm. I've been taking painting classes. Painting classes? Richard scoffed, his tone dripping with condescension, as if I'd said I was learning to fly to the moon. Shmin. She sold 2 pieces, Michael said proudly, his voice cutting through the tension. Pamela's eyes narrowed, her smile tightening. Why would you need to sell paintings? It's about joy, I replied, my gaze steady, and the table fell silent, the air thick with unspoken truths. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, Pamela cornered me in the kitchen, her mask slipping. What's going on, Elizabeth? She demanded, her voice a harsh whisper. Refusing the honeymoon, ignoring us for months, throwing money at Michael's pipe dream? It's not a pipe dream, I said calmly, arranging a cake I'd baked that morning. It's his ambition. There's a difference. She pressed on, her words sharp. Sunrise Acres has lovely apartments. Selling this house could help us all. Jennifer, Mark, our family. This house isn't for sale, I said firmly, my voice unwavering. And my living arrangements aren't up for family discussion. Richard appeared in the doorway, his presence heavy, his voice loud enough to carry into the living room. Everything okay in here? He asked, his tone falsely cheerful. Then, turning to the guests, he announced, We're concerned about Mom's decisions. She's giving away money to fund a bookstore in the digital age, isolating herself, refusing family guidance. We think a power of attorney is necessary for her protection. The room froze, the air thick with shock. Martin set down his coffee cup with deliberate care, his eyes narrowing. "That's a serious step, Richard," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "Do you have evidence of diminished capacity?" "She's funding a bookstore," Richard snapped, his voice rising. "She's refusing to downsize, making irrational choices." "Enough," I said, standing, my voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "I've paid for your lives for 3 years. Renovations, cars, vacations, a wedding. I've let you treat me like a walking checkbook, not a mother. That stops now." Richard exploded, his face red with fury. "You selfish old woman! Dad would be ashamed of you." Martin cleared his throat, his presence a quiet anchor, and pulled out the familiar envelope, its edges worn, but its power intact. "Actually, Richard," he said, his voice steady, "Thomas anticipated this exact situation. He explained the codicil to the stunned room. Any descendant who publicly humiliated me forfeited their entire inheritance." Richard and Pamela paled, their faces drained of color, their eyes wide with dawning horror. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, her voice small. "I should have spoken up about the name tag," she whispered, her hands trembling. "Yes," I said, taking her hand, my touch gentle but firm. "But we learn from mistakes, sweetheart." "I enforce the codicil," I told Martin, my voice always steady, my heart resolute. Richard collapsed into his chair, his voice hoarse. "You tricked us. You let us believe the money was there for us." "No," I said, standing to face my son, my voice quiet but unyielding. "You assumed. You demanded. You never once asked what I needed or wanted." Pamela's voice broke, desperate. "What about Jennifer and Mark? They haven't done anything wrong." Martin consulted his notes. Jennifer was present at several incidents, but didn't actively participate. However, she also never spoke up to defend Elizabeth. Jennifer's tears spilled over. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have said something." I squeezed her hand. "We all make mistakes. The question is what we learn." The gathering ended in silence, heavy and final. Richard and Pamela stormed out, their anger a storm cloud trailing behind them. Jennifer and Mark left with awkward apologies, promising to call. Martin and the other guests made tactful exits, leaving Michael and me in the sudden quiet of my home. "Are you okay?" he asked, helping clear the barely touched dessert plates, his voice soft with concern. "I'm better than okay," I said, smiling, the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. "I feel free." A year later, I stood in Chapter 1, Michael's bookstore, a converted Victorian bathed in morning light, its tall windows casting golden patterns across the hardwood floors, shelves brimmed with carefully curated books, their spines a tapestry of stories waiting to be told. Cozy nooks invited readers to linger, and a coffee counter, staffed by Michael's girlfriend Emma, served locally roasted beans and homemade pastries, the scent of cinnamon and hope filling the air. In the children's section, my mural, a whimsical forest with hidden creatures and fairy houses, delighted young readers, their laughter a melody I'd come to cherish. Twice a week, I led story time, my voice weaving tales of adventure and wonder, a role I had never imagined but now couldn't live without. Upstairs, a renovated apartment housed a young writer, part of a residency program Michael had established with his inheritance, the reward for his respect, his love, not greed. The bell over the door jingled, a bright, cheerful sound, and Jennifer stepped in, pushing a stroller with her 3-month-old daughter, Thomasina, named for her grandfather. "Grandma," Jennifer called, her smile genuine, her eyes free of the shadows that had once lingered. "Just dropping off bookmarks I painted," I said, bending to admire the baby, her tiny hands reaching for the light. "Hello, little one." Over the past year, Jennifer and I had rebuilt our bond, her apologies sincere, her efforts to connect independent of her parents' influence. Mark, steady and kind, had encouraged her to find her own voice, to step out from Pamela's shadow. They'd chosen a modest honeymoon in Cape Cod, funded by my gift, a choice that spoke of growth, of humility. Richard and Pamela were another story. After failed attempts to contest the codicil, they'd moved to Florida, where Richard took a job with a former business associate, a step down from the life they'd envisioned. Our contact was limited to stiff Christmas cards and occasional updates through Jennifer, their words clipped, their resentment palpable. But I felt no guilt, only peace, a quiet certainty that I'd done what was right. Michael joined us at a small table, sharing plans to expand the bookstore's community programs, literacy tutoring for adults, writing workshops for teens, a space for stories to grow. "It'll mean reinvesting profits," he said, his eyes bright with purpose. "But I think it's worth it." "It's wonderful," I said, pride swelling in my chest, a warmth that felt like Thomas's approval. As we talked, I gazed at the sunlit shelves, the children laughing over books, the future unfolding before us. I'd rediscovered myself in the years since the reckoning, painting landscapes that captured the beauty of my new life, traveling to Italy with a senior tour group where I'd met Claude, a widower with kind eyes and a dry wit who called every Sunday, his voice a new thread in the tapestry of my days. Thomas had protected me with his codicil, a final act of love, but I'd protected myself with my choices, my boundaries, my courage. This was my family now. Imperfect, real, built on love, not obligation. Thomasina gurgled happily, her tiny hand grasping my finger, drawing me back to the present. "What do you think, Grandma?" Michael asked, pulling me into their plans, his voice warm with inclusion. I smiled, my heart full, the shadows of betrayal replaced by light. "I think this is exactly where we're supposed to be." And so, dear listener, the name tag that broke my silence became the key to my freedom, a spark that ignited a new chapter. This is Elizabeth's Stories, where truths unravel, strength rises, and love rebuilds what was lost. Share your city below, and until next time, keep listening for the stories that set us free.